The victory of Donald Trump in the US presidential election on November 5th sent reverberations throughout the world. So, what's the stance of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, on this news? Stay tuned for today's episode to explore the answer. But before we start, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our China Facts About China. Thanks a lot for your support. Officially, China seems indifferent. Most recently, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning stated, "Our policy towards the US is consistent. We will continue to view and handle China-US relations in accordance with the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation." But this is just the tip of the iceberg. On the one hand, China is trying to show that it is okay and indifferent to the results of the latest US presidential election. But hidden behind that is China's concern about its future after Donald Trump continues to lead the US in the next term. Yuan Zhuzhen, a professor in the Department of Philosophy at National Taiwan University, mentioned that everyone he spoke with was discussing this election in the US. Sharing to Fox News Digital, he described Trump's win as a worst-case scenario for Beijing, given the already tense relationship between Washington and the Chinese Communist Party. Many of the Trump administration's policies towards China have continued under the Biden administration, as even Joe Biden recognizes the threat posed by China. However, according to philosophy professor Yuan Zhuzhen, China is now aware of the potential impact of these policies, especially at a time when their domestic economy is struggling. China's economy is in serious trouble, and countries like Canada, the US, and several European nations are imposing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle imports and other products due to accusations of dumping on the market. But whether China isn't worried about Trump's victory. After all, take a look at how calm Xi appears. Still, the reality is already unfolding and seems to be a disadvantage for China. Major US-listed Chinese stocks decreased following a decisive US election win for Republican nominee and former President Donald Trump, who threatened new tariffs on the campaign trail with a particular focus on Chinese imports. Major Chinese e-commerce Alibaba's shares experienced a significant drop of 4.5%, while JD Top 5 plunged by 7.7% and Bilibili stock declined by 7.8%. In the meantime, as the election results unfolded, the Hang Seng Index decreased by 2.2% and the Shanghai Composite Index fell by less than 0.1%. These market reactions may be linked to Trump's proposed tariffs of 10 to 20% across the board, with a potential 60% tariff on Chinese goods. According to economic analysts, a 60% tariff could lead to a 2.4 percentage point reduction in Chinese GDP growth, which is already precarious. However, analysts believe that this threat from Trump may be used as an ace in the economic game rather than being put into action. For a superpower like China striving to maintain its place on the world stage and improve the standard of living for its population, a small fall in this GDP scale could have far-reaching consequences for them. Moreover, these challenges are compounded by China's ongoing efforts to transition from a manufacturing-based economy to one focused on technology and services. Chinese tech companies, however, are finding themselves increasingly cut off from American capital, as Trump's administration previously pushed for financial restrictions on Chinese firms operating in the US. The re-election of a president with similar aims would likely exacerbate these issues, leading to an environment where Chinese companies must rely on domestic capital or seek alternative markets, such as Europe or Southeast Asia. In response to these challenges, Chinese authorities have ramped up initiatives to stabilize domestic markets and reinforce economic resilience. Government stimulus programs, investment in infrastructure, and efforts to promote domestic consumption are all part of China's strategy to insulate its economy from external shocks. Yet these measures may fall short if the United States implements severe tariffs and other economic restrictions. China's stock market may be more resilient than in the past, but it is far from immune to the pressures of a tough US foreign policy stance. So, how did the Chinese people react to the news that Donald Trump was returning to be president of the United States again? Gong Ping, a local government employee, expressed, "So, there will be a potential effect on China's economy, people's lives, or even the overseas travel of people and the exchanges between US and China." Meanwhile, Wu Qi, a teacher at a high school, is confident to say, "I think his political and economic policies were not friendly with China before, but looking at how China has developed now in its economy and power, I believe they should be a bit more restrained." Otherwise, Hao Jian, a businessman, said, "I think the election of Trump will impose more pressure on China because Trump advocates for an end of the Ukraine war, which actually has brought China more strategic space and opportunities. If Trump comes back to power, his policies will not be friendly to China and will definitely have a negative impact on China." Overall, Donald Trump's re-election as US president in early November has somewhat made China concerned about the far-reaching implications for the country's geopolitical landscape, economy, and even the daily lives of its people. Under the Biden administration, US-China relations have seen a blend of confrontation and unilateral actions similar to Trump's tenure. Biden has maintained a tough stance on trade and territorial disputes, employing tariffs and continuing military activity in the South China Sea. Despite that, he has also pursued diplomatic efforts to stabilize relations, engaging in high-level talks with China and establishing new communication channels. By contrast, analysts predict that under a second Donald Trump term, US-China relations could follow a more tense and unpredictable path, shaped by Trump's aggressive rhetoric and shifting diplomatic strategies. Trump's administration previously adopted a tough stance on China across multiple fronts. In addition to his administration's trade war with China, Trump also opposed China's territorial claims in the South China Sea, increasing the US naval presence in the area. Throughout his first term, Trump frequently criticized China, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, which he often called the China virus. This rhetoric worsened tensions and led to a more confrontational relationship between the two countries. Particularly previously, Trump's administration has doubled down on military presence in the Indo-Pacific, which China interprets as a direct challenge to its regional influence. Increased US military activities and support for Taiwan fuel tensions, leading China to adopt a more defensive stance and prompting closer ties with countries like Russia to counterbalance the US presence in the region. Consequently, this heightens the risk of political volatility in Asia and diverts China's resources toward counteracting US policies rather than advancing its own agenda peacefully. A defense expert affirms, "In fact, the Indo-Pacific is one of the world's most strategically sensitive regions, where China is rapidly expanding its appearance. Beijing is strengthening its armed forces, building alliances, advancing technology, and challenging the global balance of power." What's more, economically, Trump's re-election amplifies trade challenges. As the administration is expected to continue tariffs and trade restrictions aimed at containing China's economic growth. Accordingly, Trump's agenda adopts a considerably broader blanket approach to trade barriers compared to the more targeted strategy employed by the Biden administration. The central aim of his trade strategy is to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US that have been lost to overseas competitors, particularly China. In the past, Donald Trump initiated a trade war with China in 2018, imposing tariffs of up to 25% on a range of Chinese goods under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Then, President Biden's term has not only maintained these tariffs, but also increased or introduced new duties on strategically important goods. In his 2024 campaign materials, Trump has proposed universal baseline tariffs on most imported foreign goods, as well as a mechanism to gradually increase tariffs on countries that have been deemed to devalue their currency or engage in other unfair trading practices. While this policy does not explicitly target China, universal baseline taxes would be a major hit to Chinese exporters, particularly those selling consumer goods, as the US is an important export market for China. It would also considerably increase costs for American consumers and businesses. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has previously labeled China a currency manipulator, which means it is likely to become the target of the proposed counter-currency manipulation mechanism. Trump has also pledged to end reliance on China by adopting a range of trade barriers, of which the most extreme is revoking China's most favored national kero. This proposal has received support from bipartisan bodies such as the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. Removing China's MFN status, called Permanent Normal Trade Relations, PNTR, in the US, would allow the US to subject it to all manner of discriminatory and unilateral trade tariffs. It would also lead to serious deterioration of US-China relations and doubtlessly be met with litigation, as both the US and China are WTO members. It is as yet unclear whether Trump is serious in his intentions to take such a bold step, or whether it is simply election rhetoric. Such a move could partly harm, indirectly, the China economy and the country's standing in global trade and diplomacy. Besides his musings to remove China's MFN status, Trump has pledged to adopt a 4-year plan to phase out all Chinese imports of essential goods, including everything from electronics to steel to pharmaceuticals. He has stated to introduce rules that will prevent US companies from investing in China and vice versa, allowing only those investments that serve American interests. He has also called for a ban on federal contracts for any company that outsources to China. Thus, if Trump takes office as US president in early January next year, and those plans are implemented, this will deal a heavy blow to China's export industry to the US. On the domestic front, the economic repercussions are felt by Chinese citizens as well. The trade war between the US and China has led to rising inflation and higher costs for imported goods, affecting the average consumer. Chinese companies reliant on American imports or exports face decreased profitability, which in turn impacts employment rates and wage growth. Moreover, the Chinese government's need to compensate for strained trade relations with the US places an additional burden on public spending, with funds potentially diverted from social programs and infrastructure development. For ordinary citizens, this shift translates into tighter budgets, reduced job opportunities, and fewer opportunities for wage increases. However, to counter unilateral actions by the US, China has been fortifying its toolkit of measures, including counter-tariffs and export controls. In April 2024, China passed a new tariff law, formalizing rules for imposing anti-dumping and counter-tariffs on imports. Additionally, the anti-foreign sanctions law, passed in June 2021, empowers China to respond to foreign sanctions with its own counter-sanctions, affecting individuals and companies operating in the target country. China has already demonstrated its readiness to impose countermeasures on the US. It has recently launched anti-dumping probes into chemical imports from the US, EU, Japan, and Taiwan, restricted exports of high-end technologies, and imposed export restrictions on key metals for chip production. These measures are widely seen as retaliatory responses to US actions. The intent behind these actions is clear. China aims to safeguard its national interests and counter any attempts by the US to exert pressure through unilateral measures. By diversifying its toolkit and implementing targeted responses, China seeks to mitigate the impact of US policies on its economy and maintain its position in the global arena. However, the escalation of trade tensions and technological competition between the two countries underscores the fragility of the US-China relationship and the potential for further deterioration in the future. In conclusion, Donald Trump's re-election as US president poses significant challenges for China, amplifying existing tensions in US-China relations and threatening the stability of its economy. Officially, the Chinese Communist Party maintains a calm demeanor, reinforcing a stance of resilience and self-reliance. However, beneath the surface, there is an unmistakable unease as China braces for the potential economic and diplomatic challenges a Trump-led US administration may bring. The potential for increased tariffs and trade restrictions could further strain China's already struggling economy, impacting domestic consumers and businesses alike. As the Chinese government seeks to stabilize its markets through various initiatives, the looming threat of Trump's aggressive trade agenda could undermine these efforts. That's the wrap for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to Facts About China and turn on notifications to stay current with all our future uploads. Your support is incredibly important to us. Until next time, take care and farewell.